Hi, this is Johan. Welcome back to my channel. I'm at it again with a new story from the far north, a UFO story, of course. This time around it's number 21, and the story is told by a man named Göran Granat, and the title is Strange Light and Sound and Print in Snow. Mrs. Agnes Solberg had this peculiar experience just outside her home during the winter of 1979. She is a pensioner living 4 kilometers outside Sarpsborg in southeastern Norway. At that time she was living alone in her house, and no other witnesses to the sighting have been traced. The incident was told to the investigator during an interview in November 1980. Mrs. Solberg herself describes what happened. I had been out during the evening and came home about 9 p.m. I thought it was rather early to go to bed, so I took a rug and lay down on the sofa in the sitting room, intending to read for a little while. But soon I fell asleep. It was about 12:30 or 1 o'clock when I was awakened by a terrible grating noise and by an intense white light which lit up the entire room. At first I thought someone had crashed into the rock just outside the house, so I jumped up from the sofa to see what had happened. The fierce light came in through a window beside the sofa and illuminated the whole room as if it was midday. The light was so bright that I couldn't look directly at it without hurting my eyes. It was like looking straight into the sun. The loud grating sound was as if there was a huge grass cutter going at full power outside my window. The intense light continued for some 2 or 3 minutes after my abrupt awakening. Then it suddenly disappeared and it was totally dark outside. The grating sound stopped too, but only gradually, becoming steadily lower until it was silent about 20 to 30 seconds after the light went out. After the light and the horrifying grating were gone, I became very frightened, because now it was dark and silent in the house. I went to the window where the light had come from, but just to look outside, hoping I might discover something. But there too it was completely dark. I was terribly frightened, standing there, because I couldn't understand what had happened outside my house at 1 o'clock at night. Gradually I became calmer and decided to try and get some sleep. In fact, that night I slept heavily. The next day my grandson Paul came to visit me. As he always does when he comes to visit me, he had a look around for fox prints in the snow in my yard. He had walked towards the window where the light had shone through the night before, when he suddenly called me and asked what were these strange prints in the snow. I went to the window, and there, just outside, was a print of something very heavy. It must have been heavy, because the snow was about 35 centimeters deep, and the print was pressed right down to ground level. The mark consisted of a square measuring 60 by 70 centimeters, with a largish extension about the size of a plate at each corner. These plates had some raised portions about 2 centimeters high, while they themselves were 3 centimeters deep. From each corner of the square a diagonal ran towards its center and met in a circle, like the square itself. These diagonals were about 35 centimeters deep. In the triangle of the square farthest from the house, an oil-like black substance was distributed over a small area. Even today I'm annoyed with myself for not collecting a sample of the substance, which I could have put in a bottle or something, and had it analyzed and shown it to people. The print was visible in the snow for about a fortnight, after which it gradually disappeared due to fresh falls of snow and to changes in temperature. The oil-like substance remained until the snow melted in the spring. And now some comments by the field researcher. I find no reason to believe that this incident is a hoax. Besides, there were 6 witnesses who saw the print and testified to it. The witness told nobody of her experience until some time after the print had been observed by other witnesses. She was afraid they would suppose her to be growing old and a bit of gaga, as she told me. Personally, I got to know the story after nearly 2 further winters had passed. From one of the witnesses who had seen the print, Mrs. Solberg herself, told me that whatever it was that she experienced, and which made the print in the snow, it was not of this world. Her actual words to me were, it was probably one of these flying saucers they talk about so much these days, which visited me and left its trademark in the snow. The witness doesn't rule out the possibility that this something could have been there already when she arrived home. It is always dark at that side of the house, and she would not have noticed if anything had been there. She also thinks she probably witnessed the takeoff, because the light broke off suddenly, but the sound faded only gradually. Some additional notes. The snow around the print was completely untouched. There were electrical wires passing 50 meters over the print. Distance from the print to the house was about 10 meters. Distance from the print to the next door house was about 30 meters. This is one of those stories where there was some kind of evidence, but the witnesses failed to collect the samples of that dark, oily substance. She didn't think of actually collecting a sample and have it tested. So, a lot of sightings like this by private people, they don't think about grabbing their cameras, or if there is something strange on the ground, they, for some strange reason, they don't bother taking a sample. But she made this drawing, as you can see here, of the print. It wasn't so big, and it was physical, because it made a print in the snow. Some kind of mechanical device with a big light. I also find it interesting that there were electrical wires 50 meters above, because in many of these stories I feel that some of these sightings are connected to electricity nearby. So, that's just my thoughts. Okay, hope you enjoyed this story. Now, let's go to the next one. And this story is also from Norway, actually. And the title is UFO and, in quotes, man seen in a field near Lonke. This sighting was made at 7:30 in the morning of Saturday, 25th of July, 1981. The witness, Mrs. Hjørdis Hogstad, observed the phenomenon for about 50 minutes in a field about 200 meters from where she lived at Lonke, at Stjørdal near Trondheim. She had gone out to the field to watch the deer which usually appear there at the time of day. To her surprise, she saw what looked like a metallic object lying in the grass and twinkling in the sunlight. After a little while, the shimmering object began to move. What is more, it seemed to her that there was a little man walking behind the object. It moved along the ground till it reached the edge of a nearby wood, stopped by an aspen tree, then began to ascend and move away in a northeasterly direction. Newfuck, the name just doesn't cling so very good in my Norwegian accent, but this is a former UFO organization in Norway, operating in Norway and Sweden. And the name of the organization is NUFOC. Newfors. I could call it Newfors. It's much better than Newfuck, isn't it? So, the organization visited Lenke for the first time 2 days after the sighting, and we examined the site. We found no visible evidence that the UFO had been there, and tests for radioactivity were negative. We didn't learn about the little man until a later visit, as Mrs. Hogstad was embarrassed to mention him. Eventually, she told us that it looked as if he, the little man, was wearing a suit fitted with some kind of hood or cap drawn over the head. She thought this rather strange and laughed, until she finally realized that it was that she was observing. She had never experienced anything like this before, and the incident made a deep impression on her mind. Since the incident she has been quite upset and continued to sleep badly. No unusual observations were made by air traffic controls at Værnes Airport outside Trondheim. Nothing was seen on the radar. An aircraft left Trondheim at 7:40 a.m., so we may suppose that its flight was followed on radar. The wind was coming from the southeast with a force of 5 knots, but we cannot be sure that conditions in the valley where the sightings occurred were identical with those at the meteorological office. It is possible for wind to come in both from Trondheimsfjorden and down the Stjørdal Valley, and this may have affected the movement of the object. But if this is not the case, then it would seem that the object was moving at a right angle to the wind direction. The behavior of the object is suggestive of that of a balloon, which might have been heated by early morning sun. This would cause it to ascend and perhaps also rotate, thus giving the appearance of twinkling. However, Mrs. Hogstad had binoculars 10x50 with her to watch the deer and observe the object through them. She is convinced it was not a balloon. In the course of time, several additional witnesses came forward with details of strange observations, which could indicate that they saw the same object, though not at the same time. The shape was reported to be like a cigar, here we go, once again, moving in horizontal flight, whereas Mrs. Hogstad was sure the object was moving vertically. Witnesses from places not far away in Muruvik, Sparbu and Støren reported the same thing as Mrs. Hogstad. The witness in Sparbu observed together with his wife an object about 8 meters long which seemed to stationary in the air and without sound. After some time it disappeared at great speed. In connection with Mrs. Hogstad's observation, it was later reported that some calves had behaved in a disturbed manner and broke out of their enclosure, something that had not happened previously or since. Wow, that was interesting. Unfortunately, after many articles had appeared in local papers containing contradictory statements and sensational details, a fierce argument developed between two rival newspapers in Stjørdal. Despite this, the witness stands firmly by the report she made of her experience and remains convinced that she saw something unusual. Additional data. Weather conditions at Værnes Airport: temperature 13 degrees centigrade, wind 100 degrees, 5 knots, visibility extremely good, 60 kilometers. Mrs. Hogstad didn't actually describe it looking like a cigar, but she used the term metallic object lying in the grass and twinkling in the sunlight. And also there was a little man. He wasn't green, but it was a little man walking behind the object and into the woods. So clearly this visitation had some kind of purpose. This man was out to take a sample or do something on the ground. I also find it interesting that in connection with Mrs. Hogstad's observation, some calves had behaved in a disturbed manner and broke out of their enclosure. Cows, calves and UFOs. We have heard about the cow mutilations. There wasn't any mutilation going on, but the animals were scared. Could be that this little man was poking around in the enclosure where the calves were, and they of course got scared. Maybe he performed some kind of tests on them, took some small samples, blood test, whatever. Yeah, who knows. As always, these are true stories from the far north, so more to come, my friends, and even more spectacular sightings where the military, police and other credible witnesses are involved. So stay tuned for more and have a nice day.